I was hunched over blueprints in my cramped studio apartment, red pen in hand, marking electrical corrections for my third overtime project this month, when my phone buzzed against the drafting table. 2 in the morning. The screen showed Mom's contact photo, her worried smile from last Christmas dinner. Her text hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. "Mortgage is due. Can you help?" I stared at those 4 words, my mind racing back exactly 30 days to that kitchen table meeting where everything fell apart. Dad's weathered voice echoing in my memory. "Your brother deserves it, Angus." Jake got the family construction company. Jake got our childhood home. Jake even got Dad's vintage truck collection. And here I was, working myself to exhaustion, while my parents faced financial ruin under their chosen heir's leadership. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before I typed back the response that would change everything. Ask your heir. 4 weeks earlier, I'd driven my beat-up Honda Civic through the familiar streets of my Denver neighborhood autumn leaves, crunching under worn tires as I pulled into the driveway of the house where I'd grown up. The 2-story colonial, with its red brick facade and white shutters, looked exactly the same as when I'd left for college 12 years ago, except now Dad's prized 1978 Chevy pickup gleamed in the garage, alongside his newer Ford F-150. I walked through the front door inhaling the scent of Mom's apple cinnamon candles and the faint smell of sawdust that always clung to Dad's work clothes. Robert McKinnon sat at the oak kitchen table he'd built with his own hands. 25 years ago, his calloused fingers drumming against the wood grain. Mom bustled around the kitchen, her graying hair pulled back in the same ponytail she'd worn since I was 10. "Coffee, sweetheart?" Linda McKinnon asked, already pouring steaming liquid into my old Superman mug. Some things never changed. Jake arrived 15 minutes late, his BMW sedan pristine in the driveway next to my Honda. At 28, my younger brother still carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about money. His polo shirt was pressed, his khakis creased his smile, ready for any situation. Sorry, he said, sliding into the chair across from me. Traffic was brutal coming from downtown. Dad cleared his throat, the sound gravelly from 4 decades of construction work and too many cigarettes in his younger days. "Boys, your mother and I asked you here because it's time to talk about the future." My chest tightened with anticipation. I'd been running day-to-day operations at McKinnon Construction for 3 years, ever since Dad's first heart attack forced him to step back from the physical demands of job sites. I knew every supplier relationship, every crew chief's strengths and weaknesses, every client's quirks and preferences. The company had grown under my management, landing bigger contracts and building a reputation for quality work delivered on time. "The doctor says my ticker isn't what it used to be." Dad continued, his hand unconsciously moving to his chest. "Time to retire before this old body gives out completely." Mom reached over and squeezed his shoulder, worry lines etching deeper around her green eyes. "Jake," Dad said, turning to my brother, "you'll inherit the house, the company, and the investment accounts. We've had the lawyers draw up all the paperwork." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my coffee mug slip slightly in my grip, the ceramic suddenly slick with sweat from my palms. Jake's grin widened while I struggled to process what I'd just heard. "Angus." Dad continued, his tone softer, but somehow final. "You'll get your grandmother's jewelry collection to give to your future wife someday. It's worth quite a bit, and we know you'll treasure the sentimental value." My throat felt like it was closing. "Dad, I don't understand. I've been running the business for 3 years. Our revenue is up 30% since I took over operations." Linda leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Sweetheart, we've watched you work yourself to exhaustion. You're just like your Uncle Tommy was before his breakdown. We want you free to pursue your own dreams, not tied down to something that might burn you out." "Your mother's right," Dad added. "Jake's got the people skills for running a business. You're brilliant with the technical stuff, but leadership requires a different kind of talent." Jake reached across the table and patted my shoulder with mock sympathy. "Don't worry, brother. I'll take good care of everything Dad built. Maybe you can work for me part-time while you figure out what you really want to do with your life." The condescension in his voice made my jaw clench, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was my family. There had to be some mistake, some misunderstanding that could be cleared up with rational conversation. "What about all the relationships I've built with our suppliers?" I asked. "The contracts I've negotiated? The crew chiefs who report directly to me?" "Jake will learn," Mom said, with the blind confidence that only a mother could possess. "He's always been good with people, and you can teach him the technical aspects during a transition period." The conversation continued for another hour, but I barely heard the details about transfer timelines and legal procedures. Jake nodded enthusiastically at every point, occasionally asking questions about profit margins and client lists that revealed how little he actually understood about the construction business. As we finished our coffee, Jake excused himself to use the bathroom. I started clearing dishes, my hands shaking slightly as I stacked plates in the sink. That's when I noticed the papers scattered near Dad's chair, bank statements and financial documents that had slipped from a manila folder. One statement caught my eye. McKinnon Construction's business account dated 3 weeks ago showing a withdrawal of $15,000. Then another for $8,000, and another for $12,000, all within the span of 10 days. The memo lines were vague: operating expenses, and equipment maintenance, and subcontractor payments. But I knew our books. We hadn't made any major equipment purchases recently, and I handled all subcontractor payments through our regular accounting system. These withdrawals didn't match any legitimate business expenses I could recall. I glanced toward the hallway, hearing Jake's voice as he talked on his phone in hushed tones. Something about covering the spread and good for it by Friday. My stomach dropped as the pieces clicked together. When Jake returned to the kitchen, I was holding the bank statement. His face went pale, then quickly shifted to defensive anger. "You're going through Dad's private papers now," he snapped, grabbing the statement from my hands. "These are business account withdrawals," I said quietly. "15,000 here, 8,000 there. What are these for?" Jake's jaw tightened. "Operating expenses. You know, the kind of decisions the new owner gets to make without explaining himself to his former employee. Jake, I know every operating expense for this company. These don't match anything in our books." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that wouldn't carry to our parents. "You say one word about this, and I'll tell them about the payroll discrepancies from last year. You remember when the numbers didn't add up for 3 months running?" My blood ran cold. The payroll issues had been caused by our accountant's software error, something I'd discovered and corrected before any employees were shortchanged. But Jake could easily twist that situation to make it look like I'd been skimming money. "You know, that was a software glitch," I said. "I know what I can prove," Jake replied with a cold smile. "And right now, Dad trusts me more than he trusts you. Wonder how that happened?" I looked at my younger brother, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. The easy charm, the quick smile, the confident handshake that had always made him everyone's favorite now seemed like a carefully constructed mask, hiding something much darker underneath. Dad called from the living room, asking Jake to look at some insurance paperwork, and my brother walked away without another word. I stood alone in the kitchen, where I'd eaten thousands of meals, where Mom had helped me with homework, where Dad had taught me to read blueprints on quiet Sunday afternoons. The house felt different now, not like home, like a place where I no longer belonged. I drove back to my studio apartment, in silence, the radio off my mind, churning through everything that had just happened. 12 years of loyalty to the family business, 3 years of successful management, a lifetime of being the responsible son, the hard worker, the one who always did what was expected. None of it mattered. My parents had made their choice, and it wasn't me. 2 weeks after the inheritance meeting, I was installing conduit in the basement of a new office building for Rodriguez Electrical Services when my phone rang. Charlie Martinez's name appeared on the screen, and my chest tightened with worry. Charlie had been McKinnon Construction's head foreman for 8 years, a steady, reliable man who taught both Jake and me everything we knew about managing construction crews. "Angus," Charlie's voice was strained. "I got some bad news, hermano. Jake let me go this morning." I straightened up so quickly I nearly hit my head on a low-hanging beam. "What? Why?" "Said he's bringing in new management people who understand his vision for the company. Gave me 2 weeks severance and told me to clean out my office by 5 o'clock. My hands clenched around the phone. Charlie was the backbone of our field operations, respected by every worker and trusted by every client. Firing him was like removing the foundation from a building and expecting it to stay standing. "I'm sorry, Charlie. This is insane." "There's more." Charlie continued, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Jake's brought in 3 new guys friends of his from college. They're calling themselves efficiency consultants, and they're second-guessing every decision the crew chiefs make. Yesterday, they told Tommy Brennan he was digging foundations too deep, said it was wasting time and money." I closed my eyes, picturing Tommy's reaction to being lectured about foundation depth by someone who'd probably never held a shovel. Tommy had been pouring foundations for 15 years and took pride in exceeding safety standards. "The crews are getting restless," Charlie added. "Half the guys are talking about looking for work elsewhere. They don't trust these new consultants, and they sure don't trust Jake's judgment after he overruled your specifications on the Morrison project." The Morrison project was a custom home build that required specific electrical layouts to accommodate the owner's home theater system. I'd spent hours designing the configuration to meet both building codes and the client's technical requirements. What did he change? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "It moved all the outlets to save on wire costs. Says the homeowner won't know the difference. But you and I both know that's going to cause problems with the inspection." After hanging up with Charlie, I couldn't concentrate on work. I kept thinking about the crew good men who'd been with McKinnon Construction for years, now stuck dealing with Jake's incompetence and his college buddies' theories about construction management. 3 days later, my new boss, Elena Rodriguez, called me into her office. Elena was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, who'd built her electrical contracting business from nothing after her husband died in an industrial accident. She respected hard work and had zero tolerance for politics or drama. "Sit down, Angus," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Her office walls were covered with certification safety awards and photos from completed projects. "I've got some interesting news." She pulled out 3 manila folders and spread them across her desk. Pinnacle Development Riverside Mall renovation and Henderson School District. Ring any bells? My stomach dropped. Those were 3 of McKinnon Construction's biggest contracts projects I'd negotiated and managed before the inheritance transfer. Combined, they represented nearly $800,000 in revenue. They've all approached me about taking over their projects midstream. Elena continued, watching my expression carefully. "Seems they're unhappy with the new management at your family's company." "What happened?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Elena opened the first folder. "Pinnacle Development says your brother missed 2 consecutive progress meetings, and when he did show up, he couldn't answer basic questions about the project timeline. They're worried about delays affecting their financing deadlines." She opened the second folder. "Riverside Mall renovation reports that work crews have been arriving late and leaving early ever since the management change. The project is already 5 days behind schedule." The third folder revealed the worst news. Henderson School District is concerned about safety violations. Apparently, those new consultants your brother hired overruled established safety protocols to speed up completion times. I felt sick. These weren't just business problems. They were the destruction of everything my father had built over 30 years. McKinnon Construction's reputation had been built on reliability, quality, and safety. Jake was systematically dismantling all 3 pillars. Elena leaned back in her chair, studying my face. Here's the interesting part. All three clients specifically requested you as project manager if they transfer their contracts. They trust your work, Angus. They want you managing their projects, not your brother. I can't, I said automatically. That would be competing directly with my family's company. Elena smiled, but there was steel behind it. Your family threw away their best asset when they passed you over for someone who doesn't understand the first thing about construction management. But I recognize talent when I see it. She pulled out a fourth folder, this one containing legal documents. I'm offering you a partnership, Angus. If you can successfully manage these 3 transferred contracts, I'll make you co-owner of Rodriguez Electrical Services. We'll expand into general contracting and compete directly with McKinnon Construction, or what's left of it. These contracts alone would double my annual revenue, she continued. With your construction background and my electrical expertise, we could build something bigger than either of us could manage alone. I stared at the documents, my mind racing. Everything I'd worked for at McKinnon Construction could be rebuilt here with someone who valued my contributions instead of dismissing them. But it would mean competing against my brother, potentially driving the final nail into the coffin of my father's company. Think about it, Elena said, closing the folders. But don't think too long. These clients need an answer by Friday, and I need to know whether you're ready to bet on yourself instead of waiting for your family to recognize your worth. That night, I sat in my studio apartment staring at the partnership offer Elena had given me to review. The numbers were generous, the terms fair, the opportunity enormous. Everything I'd ever wanted was laid out in black and white legal language. But taking the offer would mean crossing a line I could never uncross. It would mean admitting that my family had made their choice, and now I had to make mine. Outside my window, Denver's skyline glittered in the darkness. Construction cranes silhouetted against the night sky like mechanical prayers reaching toward heaven. Somewhere in that maze of steel and glass and concrete, my father's company was slowly dying under Jake's mismanagement. I could try to save it by staying silent, by hoping Jake would figure things out, by putting family loyalty above everything else. Or I could save myself and build something new from the ashes of everything I'd lost. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Jake mentioned you might be upset about the inheritance decision. Remember, family is more important than business. Love you. I set the phone aside and picked up Elena's contract. By Friday, I would have to choose between the family that had rejected me and the future that was waiting for my signature. The call started 3 days after Elena's offer. Mom's voice was cheerful, but strained when she reached me during my lunch break. Sweetheart, Jake mentioned he's having some trouble adjusting to all his new responsibilities. Maybe you could swing by the office this weekend and help him understand some of the client relationships. I balanced the phone against my shoulder while unwrapping a sandwich. Through the window of the deli near Rodriguez Electrical's office, I could see construction workers from various companies grabbing quick lunches between job sites. Normal people with normal jobs who didn't have to navigate family politics just to earn a living. Mom, Jake made it pretty clear he doesn't need my help. He's got his efficiency consultants now. Oh, those boys. Linda's laugh sounded forced. They mean well, but they're not construction people like you and your father. Jake could really use someone with experience to guide him through this transition. The guilt in her voice was unmistakable. She knew something was wrong, but couldn't bring herself to admit that their golden boy might be in over his head. Has he asked for my help directly? I asked. There was a pause. Well, no. You know how proud Jake is, but I can tell he's stressed. He's been staying up late going over paperwork, trying to figure out all the details your father used to handle. What Mom didn't mention was that Dad had never handled the day-to-day operational details. That had been my job for the past 3 years. Jake wasn't studying Dad's old methods. He was trying to learn an entire business from scratch, while pretending he already knew everything. The calls continued throughout the week. Dad phoned during his afternoon walk, his voice carrying the wheeze that had worsened since his latest heart episode. Son, I know you're probably feeling overlooked by our decision, but Jake's got a good head for business. He just needs time to find his footing. How's business going? I asked carefully. Few bumps in the road, nothing unusual for a transition period. Some of the old crew are grumbling about changes, but that's normal when new management takes over. Jake's handling it well. I bit my tongue instead of mentioning that losing Charlie Martinez and half the experienced crew wasn't a normal part of business transitions. Dad wanted to believe Jake was succeeding, and nothing I said would change that, until reality became impossible to ignore. Jake himself reached out on Thursday evening, catching me as I walked to my car after another 12-hour day at Rodriguez Electrical. "Hey, brother," he said, his usual confidence replaced by something that almost sounded like desperation. "We should grab a beer sometime this weekend. I've got some ideas for the company I'd love to run by you." "What kind of ideas?" "Expansion stuff? New markets, bigger contracts? You always were better with the technical details. Maybe we could work together on some proposals." The irony was bitter. Jake was now asking for the expertise he'd dismissed when he inherited the company, but only after he'd driven away the clients who'd specifically requested my involvement. "I'm pretty busy with my new job," I said. "Right, the electrical thing. How's that working out?" There was something in his tone, a casual fishing expedition disguised as brotherly interest. I suspected he'd heard rumors about the transferred contracts, but wasn't sure how much I knew about McKinnon Construction's problems. "It's good work," I replied neutrally. "Well, when you get tired of being someone else's employee, remember there's always a place for you at the family business. Maybe we could work out some kind of partnership arrangement." The offer was too little too late, and we both knew it. Jake needed my help to save the company, but he wasn't willing to admit he'd made mistakes or acknowledge that his inheritance had been undeserved. On Friday afternoon, I sat in Elena's office with the partnership contract spread across her desk. Elena had given me until 5 o'clock to make my decision, and it was already 4:30. "The clients are getting antsy," she said, tapping her pen against the desk. "Pinnacle Development wants to start the transfer process on Monday if we're taking over their project. Henderson School District is threatening to cancel their contract entirely if they don't see immediate improvement." My phone buzzed with another text from Jake. "Family dinner Sunday. Mom's making pot roast. Would love to discuss some business opportunities with you." I stared at the message, thinking about all the Sunday dinners I'd attended over the years. All the times I'd listened to Dad's stories about building the company, all the dreams I'd had about carrying on his legacy. Then I thought about Charlie Martinez out of work because he'd refused to compromise on safety standards, about Tommy Brennan insulted by college kids who'd never mixed concrete, about the clients who'd specifically requested my involvement only to be ignored by someone more interested in quick profits than quality work. My family had made their choice. They'd chosen Jake's charm over my competence, favoritism over fairness, comfortable lies over difficult truths. Now it was time to make mine. I picked up Elena's pen and signed my name at the bottom of the partnership agreement. "Welcome to Rodriguez McKinnon Construction Services," Elena said with a satisfied smile. That evening, I called Dad to let him know I wouldn't be attending Sunday dinner. When he asked why, I told him I had work commitments with my new business partner. "New business partner?" The confusion in his voice was genuine. "Elena Rodriguez and I are expanding her company into general contracting. We'll be competing directly with McKinnon Construction." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Dad finally spoke, his voice was heavy with disappointment and something that might have been fear. "Son, that's not how family does business. You don't compete with your own blood." "You're right," I said quietly. "Family shouldn't compete with family. They should support each other, recognize each other's contributions, and make decisions based on merit instead of favoritism. Jake deserves a chance to prove himself." "He's had his chance, Dad. Ask him about the Pinnacle Development contract. Ask him about Henderson School District. Ask him about the crew chiefs who've quit in the past 2 weeks." Another long silence. Then Dad's voice smaller now. "I think you're making a mistake, Angus." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." After hanging up, I sat in my apartment looking at the framed photo on my dresser, the McKinnon Construction crew at last year's Christmas party, Dad in the center, with his arm around me, and Jake, everyone grinning at the camera like we were one big happy family. I wondered if we'd ever be that happy again or if happiness had been an illusion all along. My phone rang one more time that evening. This time it was Mom, her voice thick with tears. "Sweetheart, your father told me about your new business. I don't understand why you want to hurt Jake like this." "I'm not trying to hurt anyone, Mom. I'm trying to build something for myself." "But the family company needs you. Jake needs you. Can't you see that?" I could see it clearer than she could. Jake needed me to save him from the consequences of his incompetence and their parents' favoritism. But I was done being the safety net for someone who'd never appreciated the catch. "The family company made its choice when it chose Jake over me," I said. "Now Jake gets to live with that choice, and so do I." 6 weeks into our partnership, Rodriguez McKinnon Construction Services was thriving. The Pinnacle Development project was running 2 weeks ahead of schedule. The Riverside Mall renovation had recovered from its early delays, and the Henderson School District had praised our attention to safety protocols. Elena and I had found our rhythm, her electrical expertise, complementing my construction management skills perfectly. We just signed the lease on a larger warehouse space when Jake showed up unannounced at our office on a Tuesday morning. I was reviewing supply orders with Elena when our receptionist Maria knocked on the conference room door. "Angus, there's someone here to see you, says he's your brother." Elena raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. She'd heard enough about my family situation to understand the potential for drama, but she'd hired me for my skills, not my personal baggage. Jake stood in the lobby wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and jeans that looked like he'd slept in them. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. The confident young executive from 2 months ago had been replaced by someone who looked like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "About what?" "About you stealing my clients. About you stabbing your own family in the back. About you destroying everything Dad built just to feed your ego." Maria looked alarmed at Jake's rising voice, but I motioned for her to stay calm. "Let's take this outside." On the sidewalk in front of our building, Jake's composure cracked completely. "You stole my contracts, Pinnacle, Riverside, Henderson. Those were McKinnon construction jobs, and you poached them like some vulture circling a carcass." "When those clients left because they were unhappy with the service they were receiving," I said evenly. "I didn't poach anyone. They approached Elena directly. Because you poisoned them against me. You've been sabotaging the company from the inside probably for months before the inheritance transfer." The accusation was so ridiculous, I almost laughed. "Jake, I haven't spoken to any of those clients since you took over. They made their own decisions based on their experience with your management." "My management." He spat the words like they tasted bitter. "You mean the management I'm trying to learn while dealing with crew chiefs who second-guess every decision and suppliers who act like I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe they act that way because you don't know what you're talking about?" Jake's face flushed red. "I know enough to recognize sabotage when I see it. You turned them against me just like you're trying to turn Mom and Dad against me." "I haven't talked to Mom and Dad about business. That's between you and them." "Right. That's why Dad's been asking all sorts of questions about contract details and safety protocols he never cared about before. That's why Mom keeps wondering why the company checkbook doesn't balance the way it used to." My stomach tightened. If Dad was asking questions about safety protocols and Mom was noticing financial discrepancies, they were starting to see through Jake's facade. The gambling withdrawals I'd spotted during the inheritance meeting were probably just the tip of the iceberg. "Jake, if you're having financial problems with the company, you should talk to an accountant, not blame me for clients choosing better service." Financial problems. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The company's doing fine. A few transitional bumps, but nothing serious." "Then why do you care if we landed those contracts? There's plenty of work in Denver for 2 construction companies." Jake stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because this isn't about business, Angus. This is about you proving you're better than me. It's about you showing mom and dad they made a mistake. Did they make a mistake? The question hung between us like a challenge. Jake's jaw worked silently for several seconds before he found his voice again. Family doesn't compete with family, period. You want those contracts back? Fine. I'll match whatever Elena's paying you plus 20%. Come back to McKinnon Construction where you belong, and we'll pretend this whole thing never happened. The offer was tempting not for the money, but for the chance to repair the relationships that mattered most to me. For a moment, I imagined walking back into the familiar office, seeing Dad's proud smile, when I saved the company feeling like part of the family again. Then I remembered Charlie Martinez collecting his tools from his office after 8 years of loyal service. Tommy Brennan being lectured about foundation depth by kids who'd never worked a day in construction. The clients who'd trusted McKinnon Construction's reputation only to be disappointed by Jake's incompetence. No, I said. Jake's expression shifted from pleading to cold anger. Fine. You want to play hardball? I filed complaints with the state licensing board yesterday. Turns out, there are serious questions about whether you violated non-compete agreements when you started working for Elena. Something about proprietary information and client relationships developed while you were still employed by McKinnon Construction. My blood ran cold. Non-compete violations could shut down our partnership before it really got started. Even if the complaints were groundless, the investigation process could drag on for months and destroy our credibility with clients. You know, I never signed a non-compete agreement, I said. Maybe not formally, but there are other ways to interpret employee loyalty and confidentiality obligations, especially when someone uses inside knowledge of client preferences to steal business from their former employer. I never used inside information. Those clients approached Elena directly. Jake smiled, but it was the kind of smile a shark might wear. That's your story. My story is that you cultivated relationships with our biggest clients while you were still on McKinnon's payroll, then leveraged those relationships to steal business for your new employer. Breach of fiduciary duty, misuse of confidential information, violation of employee loyalty obligations. The licensing board will see through that in 5 minutes. Maybe, but the investigation will take 6 months, during which time your new partnership will be under scrutiny. Hard to sign new clients when there's a cloud of ethical violations hanging over your head. Elena appeared in the doorway of our building, watching the confrontation with obvious concern. I wondered how much of our conversation she'd been able to hear through the glass doors. Jake followed my glance, and his smile widened. Your partner looks worried. Smart woman. She's probably wondering if taking you on was worth the legal headaches you're bringing to her business. What do you want, Jake? I want you to stop competing with McKinnon Construction. I want you to turn down any future contracts that might conflict with our business interests. And I want you to recommend that your current clients consider transferring their projects back to the company that originally won the bids. And if I don't, then I'll make sure everyone in the Denver construction industry knows that Rodriguez McKinnon Construction Services was built on stolen contracts and violated non-compete agreements. I'll make sure the licensing board investigation drags on as long as possible. And I'll make sure mom and dad understand exactly how their older son chose to repay 30 years of family investment in his career. Jake turned to leave, then paused and looked back at me. You've got until Friday to decide. Family dinner's at 6. Mom's making her famous lasagna. It would be nice to have some good news to share with everyone. As his BMW pulled away from the curb, I stood on the sidewalk feeling like I'd just been mugged in broad daylight. Everything Elena and I had built together was now under threat. Not because we'd done anything wrong, but because my brother was willing to destroy my reputation to protect his own incompetence. Elena joined me outside, her expression serious. How bad is this? Potentially very bad. Jake's filing false complaints with the licensing board, trying to claim I violated non-compete agreements and stole proprietary information. Did you? No. But defending against false accusations can be almost as damaging as being guilty. The investigation process alone could kill our credibility. Elena nodded slowly. Then we need to get ahead of this. I know a good attorney who specializes in construction industry disputes. If your brother wants to play dirty, we need to be prepared to fight back. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone, wondering if I should call Dad and try to explain my side of the story before Jake poisoned the well completely. But what could I say that his golden boy was threatening to destroy my career rather than admit he was in over his head, that the family company was failing under Jake's leadership, and he was blaming me instead of taking responsibility. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay, love you. I started typing a response 3 different times, then deleted each message before sending it. There was no way to explain the situation without forcing Mom to choose sides between her sons, and I already knew which side she'd choose. Instead, I called Elena and told her to schedule an appointment with her attorney friend. If Jake wanted a war, I'd give him one. But this time, I was fighting for something that belonged to me, not something I hoped someone else might give me if I waited long enough. Patricia Walsh's law office occupied the 15th floor of a downtown Denver high-rise, with windows overlooking the South Platte River and the mountains beyond. Patricia herself was a woman in her late 40s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of sharp, analytical gaze that made you believe she could spot lies from across the room. I've reviewed the licensing board complaints your brother filed, she said, spreading documents across her polished conference table. They're creative, I'll give him that, but they're also desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Elena and I sat across from her, both of us tense with the knowledge that our entire business partnership hung in the balance of Patricia's legal analysis. The good news is that these complaints are entirely defensible, Patricia continued. You never signed a formal non-compete agreement. The clients approached Elena directly, rather than you soliciting them, and there's no evidence of proprietary information being misused. What's the bad news? I asked. The bad news is that defending against false accusations is expensive and time-consuming. Even when you win, the process can damage your reputation and drain your resources. Patricia pulled out another folder. However, I think we can turn this situation to our advantage. She opened the folder to reveal what looked like financial documents. I used to work as a forensic accountant before I went to law school. Old habits die hard, so I did some digging into McKinnon Construction's recent financial activity. Elena leaned forward. What did you find? Irregularities. Lots of them. Patricia spread the documents across the table like a poker player revealing a winning hand. Your brother has been very busy with the company checkbook since taking over. The first document showed a series of withdrawals from McKinnon Construction's operating account, $15,000 here, $20,000 there, $12,000 somewhere else. The pattern continued for months with increasing frequency and larger amounts. These withdrawals don't correspond to any legitimate business expenses I can identify, Patricia explained. No equipment purchases, no major material orders, no subcontractor payments that match your company's normal patterns. Where did the money go? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Patricia pulled out another set of documents, bank records, showing deposits into Jake's personal account, followed immediately by electronic transfers to various casinos and online gambling sites. Your brother has a serious gambling problem, she said matter-of-factly. Based on these records, he's been systematically embezzling from the company to fund his addiction. Elena whistled low under her breath. How much are we talking about? So far, I can document over $200,000 in suspicious withdrawals over the past 8 months. But here's the interesting part. Patricia pointed to a series of forged signatures on withdrawal authorizations. Jake used your signature on many of these documents, Angus. If this embezzlement scheme had been discovered without investigation, you would have been the prime suspect. My hands clenched into fists. Not only had Jake stolen from the company, he'd set me up to take the blame if he got caught. The licensing board complaints weren't just revenge. They were part of a cover-up strategy to discredit me. before the financial evidence surfaced. "There's more," Patricia continued. "I pulled McKinnon Construction's recent project records and found a pattern of inflated invoices for materials that were never delivered, payments to subcontractors who don't exist, and equipment rentals that can't be verified." She showed us a series of fake invoices, all bearing forged vendor signatures and inflated prices for materials that legitimate suppliers had never provided. "This is a classic embezzlement scheme," Patricia explained. "Create false invoices, authorize payments to dummy accounts, pocket the money, and hope no one notices. The problem is that your brother got greedy. The amounts became too large to hide, and his gambling addiction accelerated the timeline." "How long before this catches up with him?" Elena asked. "It already has. I spoke with a contact at Denver First National this morning. McKinnon Construction's business account is overdrawn, and the bank is demanding immediate payment on several outstanding loan obligations." Patricia pulled out one final document, a bankruptcy consultation agreement between Jake and a law firm specializing in business dissolution. "Your brother scheduled a meeting with bankruptcy attorneys for next week. His plan is to fold McKinnon Construction, claim the failure was due to inherited debt problems and economic difficulties, and walk away before anyone can trace the missing money." I felt sick. 30 years of Dad's work destroyed by 8 months of Jake's greed and incompetence. All the relationships Dad had built, all the trust he'd earned in the construction community, all the pride he'd taken in his reputation for honest dealing, gone because his chosen heir was a liar and a thief. "The licensing board complaints against you are part of this strategy," Patricia continued. "If Jake can discredit you publicly, it becomes easier to blame the company's problems on your supposed mismanagement during the transition period." "Can we stop him?" I asked. Patricia smiled, and for the first time since Jake's threats, I felt a spark of hope. "Not only can we stop him, we can expose the entire scheme. I've already contacted the district attorney's office about potential fraud charges. With this level of documentation, Jake is looking at serious federal crimes: embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy." "What about the licensing board investigation?" "Once they see this evidence, the complaints against you will be dismissed immediately. In fact, they'll probably want to interview you as a witness in their investigation of Jake's business practices." Elena reached across the table and squeezed my shoulder. "Your brother just made the biggest mistake of his life. Instead of admitting he was in over his head and asking for help, he chose to destroy everything, rather than face the consequences of his failures." Patricia gathered the documents back into their folders. "I'll need you to sign some papers authorizing me to share this information with the appropriate authorities. By Friday, Jake's world is going to come crashing down around him." "What about my parents?" I asked. "They're going to be devastated when they find out what Jake's done." Patricia's expression softened slightly. "They'll be hurt, yes, but they'll also realize they misjudged you badly. Sometimes the truth hurts before it heals." That evening, I called Charlie Martinez and asked if he wanted to meet for coffee. We sat in a quiet diner near his house while I explained everything Patricia had discovered. "I knew something was wrong," Charlie said, shaking his head. "The way Jake was throwing money around, buying expensive lunches for his consultant friends, upgrading equipment we didn't need. It didn't match the way your father ran things." "I should have seen it sooner," I said. "I should have investigated those bank withdrawals instead of just walking away." Charlie looked at me seriously. "Angus, you couldn't have known your own brother was stealing from the family. That kind of betrayal, it's not something you expect from people you love. What happens now? Now the truth comes out, and maybe some of us get a chance to rebuild what was lost." I thought about Dad probably sitting in his recliner watching television, unaware that his life's work was about to collapse around him. I thought about Mom worrying about finances she didn't understand while trusting that Jake would figure everything out. They were about to learn that their golden boy had been lying to them for months, stealing from them, and preparing to destroy everything they valued, rather than admit his failures. But maybe when the dust settled, they would also learn that their older son hadn't been the problem after all. Friday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Denver beautiful, but I barely noticed the golden leaves or clear mountain views as I drove to my parents' house. Patricia Walsh had called that morning to confirm that the district attorney was moving forward with fraud charges against Jake, and the licensing board had dismissed all complaints against me after reviewing the evidence of his embezzlement scheme. I'd asked Patricia to let me tell my parents before the news broke publicly. They deserved to hear the truth from family, not from reporters or neighbors gossiping about their son's arrest. Dad answered the door wearing his old cardigan and slippers, looking older than his 62 years. The stress of retirement and Jake's problems had carved new lines around his eyes. "Angus," he said, surprised. "I wasn't expecting you." "We need to talk, Dad. All of us. Is Jake here?" "He's in the living room with your mother going over some insurance paperwork." Dad's voice carried a note of pride. "Boy's been working so hard lately trying to get everything organized properly." I followed Dad into the living room where Jake sat on the couch next to Mom, papers spread across the coffee table. Jake looked up when I entered, and I saw the exact moment he registered my expression. His face went pale, then quickly shifted to defensive anger. "What's he doing here?" Jake asked Mom. "I thought we agreed family dinners were for family, not people who compete against us." "Jake," Mom said gently, "Angus is your brother. Angus is someone who stole our clients and filed false complaints against me with the licensing board." Jake stood up, his voice rising. "He's been trying to destroy this family for months, and I won't sit here and pretend everything's normal." Dad moved protectively toward Jake. "Son, maybe you should calm down." "I have evidence," I said quietly. The room went silent. Jake's face cycled through several expressions before settling on forced confusion. "Evidence of what?" I pulled out the folder Patricia had given me, the one containing bank records, forged signatures, and documentation of Jake's embezzlement scheme. "Evidence that you've been stealing from McKinnon Construction for 8 months. Evidence that you forged my signature on withdrawal authorizations. Evidence that you've been gambling with company money and covering it up with fake invoices." Jake laughed, but it sounded strained. "That's ridiculous. Mom, Dad, you can't believe this. He's making up stories because he's jealous I inherited the company instead of him." I spread the bank statements across the coffee table, pointing to the highlighted withdrawals. $15,000 withdrawn on March 12th, transferred to your personal account the same day, then sent to Golden Casino's online platform. $20,000 on April 3rd, straight to Boulder Creek Gaming. $12,000 on April 26th to Mountain High Poker. Mom picked up one of the bank statements with shaking hands. "Jake, what is this?" "It's fabricated evidence," Jake said quickly. "He probably paid someone to create fake documents. You know how desperate he's been to prove he should have inherited the company instead of me." Dad took the statement from Mom and studied it carefully. His construction experience had taught him to read documents carefully, and I could see the exact moment he recognized the account numbers and transaction patterns. "These are real, aren't they?" Dad's voice was barely above a whisper. "They're fake," Jake insisted, but his voice cracked with panic. "Dad, you know me better than this. I would never steal from the family company." I pulled out the forged signature authorizations. "You used my signature on these withdrawal forms, Jake. If the authorities had discovered the missing money without this investigation, I would have been blamed for your theft." Linda reached for the signature documents, comparing Jake's attempts to copy my handwriting with examples of my actual signature from old Christmas cards. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Jake, how could you do this?" "It's not what it looks like," Jake said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I was going to pay it all back. I just needed a few good wins to cover the shortfalls. It was temporary, just until I could get the company's cash flow stabilized." Dad sat down heavily in his recliner, his face gray with shock. "How much, son? How much did you take?" Jake looked around the room, realizing his denials were no longer credible. "It's not as bad as it looks. Maybe 50,000, 60,000 total." I was keeping careful records, planning to repay everything with interest. $212,000, I said. That's what the forensic accountant documented. $212,000 stolen from the company over 8 months. The number hit the room like a physical blow. Mom gasped. Dad clutched his chest, and Jake's legs seemed to give out as he collapsed back onto the couch. That can't be right, Jake whispered. It wasn't that much. I wasn't keeping track of every little theft I finished. Every little forged signature, every little fake invoice you created to cover your gambling debts. Dad's breathing was becoming labored, the same pattern I'd seen during his previous heart episodes. Mom immediately went to his side, rubbing his back and speaking soothingly. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked, moving toward his chair. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice was strained. "Just trying to process all this." Jake stood up suddenly, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "Look what you've done. You're giving Dad another heart attack with your lies and fake evidence. The only lies in this room are the ones you've been telling for 8 months, I replied. Every time Mom and Dad asked about the company's finances, every time they worried about cash flow, every time they trusted you to handle their life's work responsibly. I was trying to save the company, Jake shouted. The construction business is competitive, and I was doing whatever it took to keep us profitable. You were gambling away their retirement savings and using my name to cover your tracks. Dad struggled to his feet, his voice carrying an authority I hadn't heard since before his health problems began. Enough. Both of you just stop. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Mom's mantel clock. Jake. Dad said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and disappointment. Tell me the truth, all of it. No more lies, no more excuses. Jake looked around the room, seeing the devastation in his parents' faces, the evidence scattered across the coffee table, and the brother who'd exposed his crimes. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I have a gambling problem. It started in college, got worse after graduation. When I took over the company, I thought I could use the business accounts to cover my losses temporarily, then pay everything back when my luck turned around. Your luck? Mom's voice was sharp with disbelief. You gambled away our company based on luck. It was supposed to be temporary, Jake repeated weakly, just until I could hit a big win and pay everything back with interest. How much do we owe? Dad asked. The total debt, including what you stole. Jake was silent for a long moment. The company's operating account is overdrawn. We owe suppliers about $80,000. The bank is calling in 2 equipment loans totaling $40,000, and there are 3 outstanding contracts we can't complete because we don't have money for materials. Dad closed his eyes. What about the house? What about it? Jake, Mom said urgently, tell us about the house. Jake's silence was answer enough. Dad opened his eyes and looked directly at his younger son. You mortgaged our house, didn't you? Jake nodded miserably. I told you it was to invest in company growth, but the money went to cover gambling debts. The mortgage payment is due next week and I don't have it. The revelation hit Mom like a physical blow. She sank onto the couch, tears streaming down her face, as she realized the full scope of her son's betrayal. 30 years, Dad said quietly. 30 years I spent building that company, building our reputation, saving enough money to own this house free and clear. And you destroyed it all in 8 months. I can fix this, Jake said desperately. Give me another chance. I'll get help for the gambling. I'll work day and night to repay what I took. With what money? Dad asked. You've bankrupted the company and mortgaged our home. What exactly are you going to use to fix anything? Jake looked at me with a mixture of hatred and pleading. Angus could help. He's got those contracts now, making good money. Family helps family, right? The audacity of the request left me speechless. After months of lies, theft, and attempts to destroy my reputation, Jake was now asking me to bail him out of the consequences of his own crimes. You filed false complaints against me with the licensing board, I said. You tried to destroy my business partnership. You forged my signature to cover your theft, and now you want me to give you money. I'm your brother. You're a thief who used my name to steal from our parents. Dad stood up slowly, his decision visible in the set of his shoulders. Jake, you need to leave this house. Tonight. I don't want to see you until you've gotten professional help and figured out how to make amends for what you've done. Dad, please, I'm sorry. I know I made mistakes, but I can fix this. Mistakes. Dad's voice rose with the first real anger I'd heard from him. You didn't make mistakes, son. You made choices. You chose gambling over responsibility. You chose lying over honesty. You chose destroying this family over facing your problems. Jake looked around the room one more time, seeing no sympathy in anyone's eyes. Without another word, he walked out the front door. We heard his car start and drive away, leaving only silence behind. Mom was crying quietly on the couch. Dad stood by the window, staring out at the street where his younger son had just disappeared from their lives. I'm sorry, I said. I'm sorry you had to learn about this. I'm sorry Jake did this to you. Dad turned away from the window and looked at me with eyes full of regret. No, son. I'm the one who owes you an apology. 3 months later, I stood in the main office of McKinnon Rodriguez Construction Services, watching Elena review the quarterly profit reports while winter snow dusted the windows of our expanded headquarters. The numbers were better than we'd projected. The successful completion of our first 3 major contracts had led to 6 additional projects, and our reputation for reliable, high-quality work was spreading throughout the Denver construction community. Charlie Martinez knocked on the doorframe, his weathered face creased in a smile. Boss, the Morrison project crew is ready for the final electrical inspection. Should be wrapped up by Tuesday if the weather holds. Perfect, I said. How's the new apprentice program working out? Better than expected. These kids from the community college have good attitudes and strong technical skills. Reminds me of someone I used to train. Charlie grinned and headed back to the workshop, where he was teaching electrical basics to our latest group of apprentices. Elena looked up from her reports. Your parents are coming to the ribbon-cutting ceremony next week, right? Yes, Mom's excited to see the new facility. Dad's still adjusting to everything, but he's proud of what we've built here. The past 3 months had been a journey of rebuilding relationships alongside rebuilding our business. Jake had entered a residential gambling addiction treatment program after pleading guilty to felony embezzlement charges. He'd received a sentence of 18 months in county jail, followed by 5 years of supervised probation with restitution requirements that would take him decades to fulfill. The house had been saved when the insurance company recovered most of the stolen money from McKinnon Construction's business account. Elena and I had purchased the remaining assets of Dad's company, officially merging them into our partnership and ensuring that 30 years of built relationships and reputation wouldn't disappear entirely. Dad and Mom had both apologized repeatedly for their misjudgment, but I'd learned that forgiveness was more about moving forward than dwelling on past mistakes. They'd made their decision based on the information they had and the assumptions they'd made about their sons. They'd been wrong, but they hadn't been malicious. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see Jake's name on the screen. We'd been exchanging occasional messages since his release from jail 2 weeks ago, carefully rebuilding a relationship that might never be the same, but could at least be honest. Starting my new job tomorrow, the message read, landscaping crew with Henderson Parks Department, steady work, good supervisor, no access to money handling. Thanks for the character reference. I'd wrestled with the decision to provide that reference, but ultimately decided that Jake deserved the chance to rebuild his life, just as I'd had the chance to rebuild mine. The difference was that his rebuilding had to start from the ruins of his own making. Elena walked over to the window and stood beside me, watching the snow dust our construction vehicles in the parking lot. Any regrets? She asked. I thought about the question seriously. Regrets about exposing Jake's crimes? No. Regrets about competing with the family company? No. regrets about the pain this whole situation had caused my parents. That one was more complicated. I regret that it took a crisis to make everyone see the truth, I said. I regret that Jake's problems hurt Mom and Dad so badly, but I don't regret fighting for what I'd earned or building something based on merit instead of favoritism. Your parents seem happier now, Elena observed. Less stressed about finances, more involved in the community. Sometimes losing everything forces people to figure out what really matters. She was right. Dad had started volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, using his construction skills to help build homes for families who couldn't afford market-rate housing. Mom had joined a support group for families affected by gambling addiction and was helping other parents recognize warning signs they might miss. Jake's crime had devastated them initially, but the aftermath had also freed them from the stress of propping up a failing business and worrying about financial problems they didn't understand. Dad's health had actually improved once he was no longer carrying the weight of the company's hidden troubles. My phone rang and I saw Mom's contact photo on the screen. "Hi, sweetheart," her voice was warm and clear. "Just wanted to let you know that Sunday dinner is at 5:30 this week, instead of 6. Elena's still planning to join us, right? Wouldn't miss it. She's bringing her famous tres leches cake." "Perfect. Oh, and Jake called yesterday. He wanted to know if it would be okay to stop by for a few minutes during dinner. He understands if you're not ready for that yet." I looked out at the snow falling on our work trucks, each one bearing the McKinnon Rodriguez logo that represented the fusion of old and new family legacy and earned opportunity. "Tell him he's welcome," I said. "Family dinners are for family. Are you sure? I know this whole situation has been difficult for you." Mom Jake made serious mistakes that hurt everyone who trusted him. But he's getting help, he's working to make amends, and he's still my brother. People deserve the chance to rebuild their lives if they're willing to do the work. After hanging up, I realized that my answer had surprised me. 6 months ago, I might have said that Jake deserved whatever consequences his actions brought. But watching him struggle to rebuild his life from nothing, just as I'd had to rebuild mine, had taught me something about justice versus vengeance. Justice meant that Jake faced appropriate consequences for his crimes and worked to repair the damage he'd caused. Vengeance would have meant trying to punish him forever, regardless of his efforts to change. Elena returned to her desk to finish the quarterly reports while I walked through our workshop checking on the apprentices Charlie was training. These young men and women represented the future of our industry learning skills that would support their families and contribute to their communities for decades to come. One of the apprentices, a young woman named Sarah, was practicing wire splicing under Charlie's supervision. She looked up as I approached. "Mr. McKinnon, I wanted to thank you for this opportunity. My dad's been out of work for 8 months, and this apprentice program is helping me support my family while I learn a trade." "Keep working hard and listening to Charlie," I told her. "In 2 years, you'll be running your own electrical crew." As I watched Sarah bend back over her work, concentrating intensely on getting the technique exactly right, I thought about the lessons I'd learned over the past year. Success wasn't just about being good at your job or working harder than everyone else. It was about building something that created value for other people, whether that meant delivering quality construction projects, providing opportunities for apprentices, or helping family members find their way back from serious mistakes. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Dad. "Proud of what you've built, son. See you Sunday." I smiled, remembering his words from the inheritance meeting, "Your brother deserves it." Now I understood what Jake had truly deserved, the chance to earn his place through hard work and integrity, just like everyone else. And I deserved the chance to prove my worth wasn't determined by birth order, but by character. The snow continued falling outside our windows, blanketing Denver in fresh white that would melt away to reveal new growth underneath. Spring was still months away, but it was coming. And when it arrived, McKinnon Rodriguez Construction Services would be ready for whatever projects and challenges the new season might bring. Elena looked up from her desk. Ready to head home, I think we've earned an early evening for once. Almost, I said, walking to my office to gather the contracts I wanted to review over the weekend. Just need to grab a few things. As I collected the paperwork, I noticed the framed photo Elena had given me last month, our entire crew, standing in front of the completed Pinnacle Development project, everyone grinning with the satisfaction of work well done. Charlie stood in the center with his arm around two of our newest apprentices, while Elena and I flanked the group like proud parents. It reminded me of that old McKinnon construction Christmas party photo, but with an important difference. This team had been built on mutual respect and earned trust rather than family politics and inherited positions. Everyone in the picture had earned their place through competence and commitment. I thought about Jake starting his new job tomorrow morning with the Parks Department. It would be honest work, and that was more than he'd been doing 8 months ago. Maybe honest work would help him rebuild not just his bank account, but his character. I thought about Mom and Dad finally free from the stress of financing Jake's failures and the disappointment of watching their life's work destroyed by someone they'd trusted completely. They were learning that love didn't mean enabling bad behavior, and support didn't mean protecting people from the consequences of their choices. Most of all, I thought about the young men and women learning their trades in our workshop, the clients trusting us with their important projects, and the families whose financial security depended on the jobs we created. Building something worthwhile wasn't just about construction techniques or business strategies. It was about recognizing that everyone deserves the chance to earn their success, that family loyalty means helping people become their best selves, rather than covering for their worst impulses, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to prove they're better than their mistakes. The snow was still falling as Elena and I locked up the office and walked to our cars. Tomorrow was Saturday, which meant I could sleep in for the first time in months. Sunday would bring family dinner with all its complicated history and hopeful possibilities. But tonight I was content to drive home through the peaceful snow, knowing that I'd built something worth building and earned something worth keeping. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what you knew was right? Sometimes the people we love make decisions that hurt everyone around them, and we have to decide whether to enable their behavior or help them face the truth. It's never easy, but I've learned that real love sometimes means letting people experience the consequences of their choices so they can grow from them. I'd love to hear your thoughts on family dynamics and second chances in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and building something meaningful from difficult circumstances. And don't forget to share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the difference between enabling and supporting the people we care about. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that your worth isn't determined by other people's recognition, but by the character you build and the value you create in the world. Keep fighting for what you've earned, and never be afraid to bet on yourself when the people who should support you choose not to. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly matter in your life.